What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and continue learning about one of the wildest events in Canadian history. And this is not something that we learn about here in America. Today, I'm continuing to learn about the Halifax explosion. This is part 3. If you haven't seen part 1 or part 2, feel free to go check those out first. Or stay here in part 3. That's fine as well if you want to do that. But basically, in part 1 and part 2, we started learning about this, incredible and just tragic event in Canadian history. And the details are just shocking, to say the least. This is a story about two ships in the Halifax harbor that collided with each other, and unfortunately, one of them caught fire, and that ship also happened to be absolutely packed full of an unimaginable amount of high explosives. So when it caught fire after the boats collided, a lot of the people living nearby really didn't understand the danger that they were in. And the resulting explosion, it killed, like they said, up to 2,000 people. Countless more people were gravely injured. The destruction was unimaginable. Everything was destroyed, like within a 2-kilometer radius of this ship explosion. It's crazy to think about, honestly. I've never heard of anything like this. They attempted a rescue effort for those who were still alive after the initial explosion, trying to save them, clear debris, but then a blizzard actually came and made everything worse and more difficult. It's really a terrible situation, and that is where we're picking up in this story. So I can't even imagine what could happen next or what did happen next. But let's take a look.
As soon as the situation on the ground was under control, an inquiry was launched to establish who had been to blame for the incident.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I don't know. This is something I've kind of avoided even discussing in part 1 and part 2. Because, honestly, I don't understand all the details of this situation. And it's kind of a strange scenario where it's like, do you want to pass, like, a judgment and be like, who's responsible for this? Who did this? Who is to blame for 2,000 deaths and destruction? That's a really, really heavy question. But maybe they did an inquiry. Maybe there's some details here that's going to clear this up. We listened to the story in part 1 and part 2. There were some strange things happening when the two ships collided. The Norwegian ship, ultimately, I believe, was on the wrong side of the harbor. So, you could argue that was the cause of it. There were some things that happened that caused the Norwegian ship to be on the wrong side of the harbor, including an American ship, if I remember correctly. An American ship was on the wrong side, which made the Norwegian ship go onto the wrong side of the harbor and ultimately collide with the French ship. So, I don't know. Let's see if there's if anyone is to actually blame. Who would that be?
It might seem logical that the captain of the Emo was to blame for the disaster. After all, the Emo had been speeding through the Narrows just before the collision. It had been on the wrong side of the strait and had refused to yield even when signalled by the Mont Blanc.
So, immediately, the narrator is saying the Emo. That's the Norwegian-owned ship. It was going faster than it should have gone. It was on the wrong side of the harbor, and then failed to correctly signal and get out of the way. Whereas this French ship, sure, it was holding a lot of explosive material, but it was just going about its daily business. It really wasn't doing anything wrong that I'm aware of. So, yeah.
However, the presiding judge, Mr. Justice Arthur Drysdale, had little hesitation in blaming the crew of the Mont Blanc, who he alleged had failed to follow the rules concerning the movement of ships.
No kidding. That is not what I expected to hear. So this actually went to a court and a judge. They actually passed a legal ruling and a full investigation. And somehow they determined the Mont Blanc, the French-owned ship with all the explosives, was to blame? Really? Really? Like, more than the other ship? I'm not sure I understand why that would be.
There were likely several reasons behind this rather one-sided judgment, not least of which was a great deal of public anger.
Oh.
Given that the crew of the Emo had almost all been killed in the explosion, this anger was focused largely on the surviving crew of the Mont Blanc, who had, after all, abandoned ship in order to save their own lives when the fire began.
Wow. Man. I'm curious, like Canadians out there. I'm sure you've learned about this event in your history classes. Have you learned about it in this much detail? Because it's honestly fascinating, but this is a really a lot of details. Besides the actual explosion, that's the story. The story is this tragedy of the ship exploding, killing thousands of people, and causing destruction. But the details of like afterwards are very interesting. So there was maybe some bias here. Maybe. Again, this is just, my crude American analysis. But they actually were harsher on the French ship and the French crew, the Mont Blanc, because they were the only ones that survived. I didn't realize. The Norwegian ship just got decimated, and the crew was killed, I guess. I'm shocked that the crew members on the Mont Blanc survived as well. You can't really blame them for abandoning ship. Once their ship was on fire, out of control, and I think basically stranded on the side of the river, why would you just sit there and die with your ship? I really don't blame them for leaving. I hope they tried to inform other people around of the danger and that everyone should get away, but apparently there was a lot of anger around the survivors and how they handled that, and perhaps anger around, hey, that's the ship that exploded, so I'm going to be angry at that. Whereas I think the details are a little more nuanced than that.
3 men were charged with manslaughter. They included Amy Lemedek,
Wow.
the captain of the Mont Blanc,
Wow!
Francis Mackey, the harbour pilot, and Frederick Evans Wyatt, the
Wow.
chief examining officer of Halifax Harbour.
Wow! 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 I did not know that some of the crew of the Mont Blanc was actually convicted of murder? Yeah. Manslaughter. Wow. Wow. I thought this was just a freak accident, and geez, I wasn't expecting that. And one of the operating officers of the harbor, I could at least understand that. If you're like operating the goings-ons of the harbor, maybe your job is to make sure there's better communication and all the practices of the harbor are upheld, and on this day they weren't. There were boats on the wrong side of there were several boats on the wrong side of the harbor, which caused a lot of, it caused this situation. So I could see where the Port Authority would be blamed for some of this. I could see that. But the captain of the Mont Blanc, I wasn't expecting that.
And Frederick Evans Wyatt, the chief examining officer of Halifax Harbour. However, none of these men were ever brought to trial, as there simply wasn't enough evidence to do so.
Okay. They were just accused, never convicted. Okay, set the record straight.
In any event, the ruling that the Mont Blanc alone had been at fault was overturned by the Supreme Court of Canada in 1919, and it was established that both ships had made errors which contributed to the disaster.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I'm not a judge. This went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and they determined, both made mistakes, which, from the description we got in part 1, that seemed accurate to me, but, we just have to go with what we hear, I guess.
Despite the devastation of Halifax, some positive outcomes did arise from the disaster.
Really?
The rules concerning harbour navigation and the storage of hazardous materials were changed to make a repeat of the explosion unlikely.
Yeah. I think that's something I was talking about in part 1 and part 2, is something had to change after this. You can't just be loading a ship with almost a nuclear amount of explosive potential. You can't just be doing that. And like it's nothing. You can't just have a nuclear bomb on a ship. Essentially a small nuclear blast on a ship just going around. And if you do, it should have been the ship should have had a big sign on it. A big sign that said, I am sailing a nuclear missile on this ship. Please get away if that makes you uncomfortable. And I think a lot of people would have probably got out of town for that day. I would have. There could have been warnings, better procedures for sure. I totally agree with all this.
Beyond this, the huge rescue efforts served to inform and bolster charitable organisations within Canada.
Okay.
The massive number of eye injuries caused by flying glass, for example, led directly to the founding of the Canadian National Institute for the Blind a few years later.
Wow. How terrifying is that? That's so sad. That is so sad that a lot of people were watching the explosion through their windows, and the explosion shot glass into their eyeballs. So much so that they actually started this Canadian National Blind Institution, charity. That's wonderful that this event did trigger a lot of great causes. But of course the event itself is so tragic.
While the extensive rescue effort underlined the importance of the Red Cross and helped them to grow into the humanitarian organisation they are today.
Nice. Yeah, let's take a moment to, emphasize the amazing response of Canada to this crisis. Immediately kicking into action, trying to save survivors, starting up a lot of these, new services and volunteer efforts to help the survivors. And, yeah, Canada seems very, very good at responding to crisis.
In the aftermath of the disaster, there was a huge need for housing, and this led to the construction of one of the first public housing projects in Canada, known as the Hydrostone.
Oh, wow.
Some of the dwellings constructed during this time are still in place today, providing a home to Halifax's modern citizens.
Oh, wow.
One of the most enduring legacies from the disaster is one of civic friendship. Boston was one of the first cities to send aid to Halifax, and this aid arrived at a crucial time.
Hey, okay. There's a little... The only other American reference in this story was an American ship who was on the wrong side of the harbor, which may have pushed the Norwegian ship further into the French ship. So it was bad. Finally, a good American reference here. Boston? Boston, Massachusetts? Sent aid to Halifax? That's fantastic.
Just as the blizzard was setting in.
Yeah.
The help provided by Boston was vital in saving lives and relieving medical staff and rescuers.
Good.
As a thank you for this vital support at the most difficult time in its history, Nova Scotia donated a Christmas tree to the city of Boston.
What? Really? That's awesome. That's awesome. Maybe if you live in Boston, Massachusetts, like maybe the Americans there know more about this Halifax explosion story. Because like I was saying, most Americans have never heard of this. I had never heard of this, never learned about it. Maybe the Bostonians know because of this Christmas tree. That's awesome. That's kind of a special moment there. Okay.
Many years later, this became a tradition, and to this day, Nova Scotia provides Boston with a tree.
No way! Huh.
Though devastated by the explosion that rocked the harbour on the 6th of December 1917, Halifax has risen from the ruins. Today, it is a thriving maritime city, home to more than 400,000 people.
Oh, wow.
The Halifax explosion remains a painful but vital part of its history.
Yeah.
And reminders of the suffering, the loss, and the heroism of rescuers are everywhere.
Wow. So there's monuments and stuff to remember this by, as well there should be. But yeah, we're kind of getting into the modern day now, and how Halifax is doing now, and the aftermath of all this, and how, some of that stuff. So I think this might be a good place to stop, actually. We've actually still got a quarter of this little documentary left. And it sounds like that's going to be about like Halifax today, and how this event has been remembered and processed in history. And so I think I'm going to stop here for now. This has been so extraordinarily interesting. Obviously, it's a tragic event, but very interesting to look at, like as a historical event. And man, pretty crazy, to be honest, but I do enjoy learning about this. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on the Halifax explosion. And if you're interested in part 4, the conclusion of this, or just more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and learning about Canadian culture, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.